Well, good morning again. We are closing out our series today called Faith That Works, and it's been based off the book of James. How about the projector? By the way, this is the same projector we've been using the last few weeks. It's just there's no natural light coming in those big windows. And I don't know about you guys, but I struggle to see the other projector even on stage, okay? I'm this close to it. This looks really good. So it lets me know we got the right projector. Just we need to get curtains in that big room, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, we're closing out our series on James. Hopefully, maybe you've had some opportunities to even read some of the book of James on your own time. It's a short book. You could read it in one reading. It's 5 chapters. They're fairly short and readable chapters. It's a very practical book. James is a leader in the church, and the church goes through a season of persecution, really deep persecution, where they get scattered outside of Jerusalem, and they have to flee for their lives. They don't have a whole lot of time and planning and preparation, and so they just take whatever they can, and they flee. And James is actually, for some reason, able to hang back. It seems like he has either some protected status or he's in hiding or we don't really know. But ultimately, he's writing from Jerusalem to all these people who have been scattered, these people that have been displaced. And much of what he's sharing are these practical values to live by within their new reality. Their new reality being refugees. Their new reality being that they're having to rebuild their entire lives. And some of what he's sharing with them is challenging. Some of it's really encouraging to them. Some of it's very reminding them of who they are and what it means to follow Jesus. Today's message is really kind of centered on greed. James targets those who are wealthy and commit various injustices. And believe it or not, this is kind of James' way of encouraging the church. The church has been, at this particular point in time, on the receiving end of those who are committing economic injustices against them, whether that's exploiting them through their greed. And it's likely that even though we have a couple in the time of Jesus, wealthy people that are part of the church is predominantly made up of individuals who are coming from the margins. Jesus reached to the margins. He reached predominantly the poor. And so as he's reaching these individuals, and then the church becomes those individuals, and they're sharing, and there's this way of the flow of resources is going out to the whole community and taking care of one another. They've probably experienced among them some who have been exploited economically, maybe quite a few. And you could even argue the fact that they're even displaced is a product of their low status, even economically, not just politically. And so James is at the very end of his letter here. We're at the opening of chapter 5, and James begins a pretty bold, and I would even say of all the New Testament, maybe the most scathing commentary on the greedy. And so we're going to read this, and it might be challenging for you to hear. It's a little bit like, whoa, James, okay, you're really coming in hot on this. But we'll start. James chapter 5, verses 1 through 2 says this: "Look here, you rich people, weep and groan with anguish because of all the terrible troubles ahead of you. Your wealth is rotting away, and your fine clothes are moth-eaten rags." We're going to stop there real quick. Okay, he's boom, this chapter opens up, and he's going in. What I think is hilarious, have any of you guys, raise your hand if you're on Instagram. If you know what Instagram is, raise your hand. I'm just kidding. So some of us are on Instagram. Maybe you've heard of Preachers and Sneakers. Raise your hand if you've heard of Preachers and Sneakers. Oh, we have a few Preachers and Sneakers fans. I follow that account. So Preachers and Sneakers is an Instagram account you should totally follow. At least I think you should. But pretty much the goal, or I don't really know that they have a stated mission, but I'll say what I think their stated mission is, which is to out pastors who wear way too expensive clothes. And it's pretty hilarious. If you go there, they'll show you the picture of the pastor preaching a sermon like I am right now, right? And then they'll say, we know how much that t-shirt cost, or we know how much those shoes cost, and they'll show the cost of it right next to it. And you're just sitting here oh man, that's crazy. One one pastor on there was wearing shoes that cost $5,611. If you gave me that shoe budget for the rest of my life, I wouldn't use it all, right? Like, I mean, I would maybe find a way. But I guess I'm saying, like that's crazy. Okay, just so you know, these cost me $35, and I think they're pretty fly. Like, I'm down with it. Like, but I guess like I'm just sitting here like, what? Are you kidding me? 5,000? And then like one pastor was wearing a T-shirt in an Instagram post that cost $1,407. What? 1,000? I know where you could get a really good shirt for $25, okay? A really good one. A really good shirt for $25. Okay. So, I mean, there was a pastor wearing a parka that cost $9,625. That thing like has built-in heat. If it's like, it has to have heaters in it. Like, are you kidding? A messenger bag for $2,590. Like, and the account doesn't like make all these bold statements or declarative statements. And I mean, I follow it more as like it was a funny thing, but it's actually kind of very interesting when you read what James is talking about in this particular passage, because he references fine clothes. And it might very well be that James is really targeting here the religious. When you think about fine clothes, when you think about the Pharisees and kind of the way in which some of the early church would have understood status and what mattered, and that being maybe connected to how well dressed you were. I was actually talking to someone recently who said of all the problems they had with Christianity, the thing they remember the most was being a young kid and being told they had to dress up for church. And that just really bothering them over and over again, every Sunday having to dress up. And what this person realized was it was more about a status thing and who I am. And I have to appear to be better than everyone else. Like, and this is how it works. Like, and this is what's expected of me. And this is what it means to go to church every Sunday, is to be this. And so as you're coming out of that culture, James is saying, your wealth is rotting away and your fine clothes are moth-eaten rags. And then he continues and he says, your gold and silver are corroded. The very wealth you were counting on will eat away your flesh like fire. Wow. Okay. This is like really of like the prophets of old kind of like statements that he's saying here. This corroded treasure you have hoarded will testify against you on the day of judgment. For listen, hear the cries of the field workers whom you have cheated of their pay. The cries of those who harvest your fields have reached the ears of the Lord of heaven's armies. I think that's interesting. There's this like, okay, here's what you wear. You have all this gold. It's eating away your flesh. Interesting imagery. And then James is like, you've exploited people. There are people that work for you that you have exploited. You've taken advantage of people so you could have the best clothes, so you could have the gold, so you could have all this. And what it tells us is that God cares about justice. And in this particular culture, it was an agriculture like type time. Like everyone would have got agricultural references. And so this image of workers in a field being mistreated would have been something that everyone would have probably had a framework for or been aware of. And so there's this picture here of justice. And so what is biblical justice? Justice to make right? And I think to be in right relationship, we talked about this last week, to be in right relationship with God, but in right relationship to my neighbor, and that both of these, both of this needs to happen. And the image that I said is helpful to remember is a cross, because a cross shows this and a cross shows this. And so to be in right relationship with one another and with God. From a scriptural point of view, justice means loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. There's an element of justice here. Can you love your neighbor like you love yourself while you exploit them? Probably not. And so it is rooted in the character and nature of God to seek justice, to seek that things would be made right, to seek that we would even work for justice, to call us and challenge us to work for justice in our world. And so as James shares this, it brings us to a point of saying, okay, hold on, what What have I maybe done to exploit others? Can I love my neighbor while I'm exploiting others? What have I done to participate in systems or structures that might be exploiting others? Because it's difficult to love our neighbor from that position. The passage continues, and this is just still going. By the way, all these yous I think is really interesting. Like verse 5 starts with you have. Like it's difficult to know if it doesn't seem as if James is talking to the church here. It seems as if he's talking to the audience that's going to be the third party kind of reading this letter after it goes to its initial audience. Because it's very unlikely that many people in the church have been in a position of power. They've been exploited themselves, but it's an encouragement to hear James saying, y'all got this wrong. You've been exploiting these people. You have this wrong. So you have spent your years on earth in luxury, satisfying your every desire. You have fattened yourself for the day of slaughter. You have condemned and killed innocent people who do not resist you. If you remember last week, James opened chapter 4, and he said this, You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it, so you fight and wage war and take it away from them. And we talked about how last week kind of the way we're often in conflict with one another is that at the root, a selfish thing. James is continuing that like challenge of like our selfishness, our greed, even toward economic and power structures. And so this selfishness idea, James is continuing to expound on, but in an economic way. In this case, it's far more about the injustice that it creates in our world. And a few months ago, we talked about wealth and riches. Like, I don't really love challenging us on this because sometimes for many of us, it's difficult. Like, it's hard to talk about money. It's hard to talk about wealth. It's hard to talk about greed. I don't know about you, but I love Amazon Prime. So like when someone tells me, hey, Amazon's not treating their workers right, I'm like, but I get my packages in 2 days. So, no, I mean, right? Like seriously, like just be honest. Like if we're all honest, like whenever like something comes out that says like, unless you're an Android person, whenever something comes out that says like Apple had something like going on at their factory that was shady, like, and they weren't treating people right, you're like, oh, really, Apple? Come on, fix that. Like, because I can't transition to another platform. Like I have everything in the cloud. Like you immediately start to think of all the excuses. That's how our brains work. Like what's the path of least resistance? And often the path of least resistance is for us not to pause and like check our motives, not to pause and check how would we feel if we were on the other side of this, if we maybe weren't having an advantage from it. And then the other thing that's really difficult is for us to decide like what are our goals financially. And I don't mean this like maybe you have the goal of like getting out of debt, but like what is enough for you? Like where is the place where you're satisfied, where there's contentment, might be the way of saying it. Because often we aren't content. If I was to like do a blind poll in this room and ask, are you content with your financial situation? I think there'd be very few people that would be like, yeah, I'm content, I'm good. No, most of us are chasing and striving something more. And a few months ago, I asked us when we were talking about generosity, what we thought rich was. And I thought we'd do it again just because, first of all, some of you don't even remember what I talked about last week. So I know 3 months ago is like years ago, okay? But second off, some of you might not have been there. So I think this is really good. So here's the practice. Here's what we'll do. What I want you to do is talk to your neighbors and determine what do you think rich is, okay? And rich meaning assets owned, okay? So like, what does someone have to be worth, okay? So like someone could be worth $100,000. That could be part of their income, but also part of what they own. They could be worth $1 million, $5 million, $10 million, whatever you think rich is. I want to hear what that is. Share it amongst your group, and then I'll share you a little bit of information about a group that was polled and asked the same question. So share amongst yourselves. Take about 60 seconds. Get to know your neighbor, shake their hand, say hello. Tell them how rich you think rich is. You're going to go 0 to very interesting conversation about finances. All right. No, there's no giveaway. There's no prize if you get it right because there's no right answer. But I'm sure your answer is the right answer. All right. So what's interesting is there's an organization of investment managers, Nuremberg and Bergman, They sponsored a survey, a wide-ranging survey of people from different economic and assets statuses. And they surveyed them and asked the same question I just asked you, what is rich? And they also asked them if they considered themselves rich. And so that was the question. What is rich, and do you consider yourself to be rich? The baseline for rich was between $1 and $5 million, okay? That was kind of the baseline that came out for what people considered to be rich, which is interesting because obviously this is a group from the United States that we're talking about now, and this particular research was from the United States. If you were to broaden that out, that would be pretty crazy, like in some contexts, but we'll keep it to our particular context. So $1 to $5 million being considered the baseline for rich. Interestingly enough, 55% of the people that were polled that had assets and wealth ranging from 1 to 5 million did not consider themselves rich. So more than 1 in 2 that fell into the category that the majority determined was rich did not consider themselves rich. In essence, like there wasn't this like overwhelming contentment. Does that make sense? Or this acknowledgement that what they had was rich or was wealthy or was was something to be satisfied with maybe. What I think is so interesting is greed, and I think this is where sometimes you might say, man, James, this is a little heavy-handed, man. I don't know. Like, you're coming in hot in chapter 5 here. Like, you're laying it all out. I think the problem is James knows, like, when this gets attached, like, when this gets your heart, when you buy in to the carrot and the stick and you're just chasing that thing, everything else fades away. Like, you're not worried about the kingdom of Jesus anymore. You're worried about the kingdom of your wealth. Like, you're like Scrooge McDuck. You're diving into the gold bin with all the coins. Like, this is who you are now. Like, you can't have this and the kingdom. Like, it's so hard to chase that if that's what you're chasing and that's what you're orienting your whole life around. Because when you think of chasing that carrot, it's determining your direction. It's determining your particular trajectory. And to me, that would be greed. It's not that we can't have goals financially. It's not that we can't even chase things and hopes for ourselves and dreams even for ourselves financially. It's what happens when that particular chase becomes something that grabs a hold of our heart that we're willing to sacrifice relationships to get there, or that we're willing to oppress other people. Because James is saying the outcome of this is that you literally are oppressing people so that you can get your fields harvested. You're not paying them a fair wage, or maybe they're doing all the work and then you're just cutting and running and you're not even giving them anything. What happens when that happens? That's something to be deeply concerned about. And even more, I think you find that like when people are motivated by greed, they struggle to be generous. Like, because generosity doesn't necessarily fit into the equation. Like, and Jesus is constantly generous and encouraging us to be generous. So it seems that James knows something and he's warning us. And I think James and Gandhi would have really got along. Like, if James and Gandhi would have hung out, like, I think they really would have got along. One of my favorite Gandhi quotes is this quote right here. "The world has enough for everyone's needs, but not enough for everyone's greed." The world has enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. I think that's interesting when you pause and reflect on that and think about that. You're like, yeah, that's probably right. Like, that's probably correct. And when you look at the early church and how the early church, you literally had people joining the early church and selling some of their property or and sharing and caring for the widows and the orphans. There was this desire to say, no one in this community goes without like their basic needs met. And if it means that like some of us have more, we're willing to lay that down to make sure that like the widows get fed, to make sure that the orphans are taken care of, to make sure that those at the furthest reaches of the margins are cared for. And that, in a lot of ways, is what the church has continued to do. Not in the same model, not in the same way, but in caring for things like Sanctuary Harrisburg, things that we are a part of. Like, it's rooted in that desire to say, we have a responsibility to care for one another. We have a responsibility to lift one another up. So, what happens, just imagine yourself, let's imagine we're receiving this letter in the mail, you know what I mean? UPS drops it off, it's certified, and the leader of our community has to sign for it, and then we're like, oh, we got a message from James. Actually, what it would be is we would open our Apple computer and it would be in the mail, right, in the email. But anyway, let's imagine we receive this as a community, but we've recently been displaced. Like, what if you've been displaced? Like, take a moment to think for a moment if, like, by Friday this week you had to, like, flee violence and the type of state of mind you'd be in. And that violence was largely coming from somebody who, for most of your life, you've known to be someone that's been in power over you, or a group and system that's been in power over you. Not only power over you physically in the sense that they can, like, do violence to you, but also economically. And now you found yourself joining the team that is the Christians, which are even more hated than the group that you previously were, where you were trying to fit in and trying to chase that. But now you've, like, caught this vision for the kingdom, and that's put you on the outs even more. And you've now displaced to a place like Samaria, where you've been told your whole life, like, this is the worst of the worst places to ever be. And now you're there, and you receive this letter from James. This might be, like, the most encouraging note of all. Just a reminder, like, I know it looks like they're winning, but really every decision they're making, like, their heart is so far from the heart of God. Like, yeah, I know it looks like they're wearing the finest clothes and they're living in the best houses, and I know it feels like all your possessions are gone and you're at, like, rock bottom financially, but here's the deal, like, their hearts are gone. Like, that's something that's far more valuable than all of that other stuff that you've been told matters. And so here's how he pivots, and he actually goes here, dear brothers and sisters. So it's clear that he's addressing the group. He's addressing, as you guys kind of take on, just think of, like, what it would be like to be in that first century. He's addressing you. Be patient as you wait for the Lord's return. So, like, there's this image of, like, just be patient. I know it looks like you're losing. I know it looks like and feels like the world is against you, but be patient. The Lord will return. Consider the farmers, again, another agricultural reference, who patiently wait for the rains in the fall and in the spring. They eagerly look for the valuable harvest to ripen. You too must be patient. Take courage, for the coming of the Lord is near. And the coming of the Lord is this reference to, like, everything will be made right. Justice will prevail. Like, this doesn't mean that you don't have to work for justice in your circumstance, but ultimately, because Jesus did, by the way, Jesus worked for justice in his circumstance and even challenged the church to do so. But it means we recognize that a time is coming when all things will be made right. So we wait patiently, like the farmer who plants the seed and doesn't see anything growing, doesn't see anything sprouting up, but ultimately things have started under the surface. A process has begun, and ultimately it will unfold. Now, we don't get that agricultural metaphor for patience because we don't necessarily, I don't know how many of you guys are out, working the fields, but we don't really live in as much of an agricultural society. So I thought, what are some good metaphors for us to use that maybe aren't agricultural, but still tell us, to be patient? Kind of like if you're a Steelers fan this year, it's just going to be a year of patience, okay? Just commit to a year of patience, okay? Just breathe, deep breaths. And I mean, kind of like if you were an Eagles fan until a couple years ago, you had to be patient because you never knew if you were going to win a Super Bowl, and ultimately it kind of just fell together. Like, let's be honest, it's never happening again. I don't know, but like ultimately you got to be patient. That's the kind of patience I'm talking about. So hopefully, no, I'm just kidding. But the truth of the matter is like, I think what's so interesting about this part is that James has this way of being very bold and brash about the reality of greed and the reality of what it can take. Like, it can take everything from us. It can strip away every single compass that is pointed toward the kingdom and point it toward our own selfish gains. And he speaks very boldly about it, but he's also encouraging the church to say, even though you're finding yourself in this place where it might feel like based on every single marker of the world, you're losing, based on everyone around you, like you're the worst of the worst, you're at the bottom of the rung. Here's the deal. Be patient, because a time's coming when everything will be set right. Like, if you ever felt like you've been stomped on and you're just completely the underdog, it seems as if James is saying, just patiently hang there, because God's got you. God's got you. And like when everything's made right, your heart's going to shine through that. Like the fact that you've worked toward the kingdom, the fact that you've worked in kingdom values in a world that doesn't necessarily respect the values of the kingdom, that's going to have a huge impact on your connectedness, your right relationship to the Creator, and ultimately even to your neighbor. Let's pray. Good and gracious God, we thank you for this series, for this faith that works. You call us to be at work, and even today at work, guarding our hearts, at work, working to be in right relationship with you and right relationship with our neighbor. So God, show us what we need to do to guard our hearts. Reveal to us. We're all in different places with this talk. Some of us, maybe we just needed to hear that we need to be patient. Some of us, we need to maybe even consider how we are chasing that carrot. Some of us, maybe we just needed to be encouraged that ultimately, God, you're on our side. You're working with us as we work for the kingdom, even though the values of this world don't necessarily reveal that things like forgiveness sometimes can feel like you're on the wrong side because you just keep giving love to someone, giving grace to someone, and it's so difficult to let go of these pains and hurts that we've been given. Just anything kingdom-oriented, any value that is ultimately about the kingdom of God can sometimes feel like it's sending us backwards. But God, may we not operate from a place of selfishness, but instead, as you did, a place of selflessness. And so bring us to that place, and ultimately let it be motivated by love, self-sacrificial love. Let us work for justice, even as James here reveals the injustices that are happening in the world around even just the farming community. There are so many injustices happening in our world. And so as you reveal those to us, God, let us be people who work for those who are on the receiving end of that, those who are at the margins, those who are being exploited. May we be champions for justice in our world, but ultimately may we also have a vision for the reality that one day everything will be made right. One day all things will be made new. We'll be in right relationship with you fully and in right relationship with the rest of your creation. We look forward to that day. And so if there's no encouragement we get from today, let us at least take some encouragement from the reality that one day everything will be made right. In the name of Jesus, amen.